posting about a blog post that Roger had written, which was really looking at what he called, and he's now denying it, the 5 essential elements of online learning. And we got into a Twitter discussion, and then Sheila suggested that we take it and talk about it one evening. And then I thought, we've got this conference, why instead of having a private chat just between the six of us, we do it in front of all you, and then you can get questions, and then maybe something interesting will come out of it. So that's the background to this. I think we've kind of backtracked a bit on some of it, or we want to talk around some of it. But essentially, what the elements of the post was that with things like, and we'll go through explaining some of these terms as we get to them, things like presence and connectedness and eventedness, which is that Dave's term, and facilitation are all key things that often get missed from online learning, or at least aren't the focus necessarily. And instead, we maybe look at content and then maybe look at activities, but Roger placed those at the bottom of this list, which again, he might want to talk about more. So that's where we're coming from with this, is expanding the idea of online learning, looking at other things around presence and connectedness as essential elements of online learning. But we want to maybe unpack that, look at some of the theories behind that, whereas rather than break those down one by one. We're also going to start off with an introduction about who we all are, which I just forgot. I'm Mark Childs. I'm working at the Open University now, and I've been in IET since March. So we'll take it one at a time. Sheila, do you want to go next?
Okay, hi everyone, I'm Sheila McNeil. I'm an independent digital learning consultant, and for the next 2 weeks I will still be the chair of and I think I've worked with practically everyone in the room here today.
And Dave White,
Hello,
do you want
I'm
to go
Dave
next?
White. Yeah, I do.
No.
What? Hello, I'm Dave. I'm Dave White. I'm head of digital learning at the University of Arts London. That's it.
Okay, Amber.
So I'm Amber Thomas. I manage the academic technology and digital transformation team at the University of Warwick. So I'm in an IT context, but I've been right in the middle of Warwick's pivot to online, which has been an interesting journey.
Dave C, are you?
So my name is Dave Cormier. I am not moving in my picture on purpose because I'm all the way over in Canada. I am in charge of digital learning strategy at the University of Windsor.
And Roger.
Hi, yeah, Roger Emery down in Solent University at Southampton, head of learning technologies there, and I also sit on the steering group for the heads of e-learning forum.
Cool. Okay, so Amber volunteered to go first. So do you want to kick things off then?
I did. So I think it's probably fair to say that I don't really delve into very much theory of online learning. I'm kind of always busy with the practicalities of it. So it takes a lot for theory-based things to bubble up. But I have had a big shock over the last few months of how many academics have not engaged with this whole area before. So there's a lot of misconceptions that I've come across about what it means to run a good online course, or even a good blended course. There's people that have never had a need to come to my team for advice, and you realise that they're really operating without a good framework for thinking about this stuff. And actually, to pick up on what you were saying, Mark, that what they think good online learning looks like is probably based on their experience of clicky online courses where it's all about interactive gadgets and little multiple choice quizzes, and that it's very sort of slick executive style learning, and they've never sat the other side of that to know what the design process is like. And they've got quite a negative conception of what it would mean for them to be doing something like that. So when I saw Roger's post on LinkedIn, I thought, actually, that's a really good way of laying it out. There were, obviously some concepts that I'd come across before, but this idea of putting presence first, connectedness, eventedness, facilitation, and content and activities last, I thought actually that's a really helpful framing for the sorts of conversations that we need to be having with people who are rethinking how they're going to teach this module in these circumstances. So I leant back into the sort of theory and concept stuff, because I thought actually these are some really foundational concepts that if people grasp these, they'd be a much better starting point.
Does somebody want to come in next, maybe talk through what some of those things are? I'm going to go for Dave. Do you want to? Oh, no, Roger, you, because it was your post. Do you want to actually talk through what it was about those 5 elements that you really wanted to focus on?
Yeah, well, this went back to a starting point we've all been at, is how do we push a few thousand modules online in a very, very short time, ready for September, and that's where we were looking at about a month ago. And what's the starting point, and where do we want to end up? And one of the things that sat in my mind was the serendipity space was the start of it. Is how do you meet in a corridor or in the library or the cafe or somewhere? How do those things happen online? Because they're very much, and I felt not just at Solent but other places, we're very siloed into our modules and courses and so on. In the physical campus, you can break out of those classrooms and walk down a corridor, but you don't really do that online. And then I started thinking about a few more things, and many writings of Dave White and others, thinking about a different way up, and sort of that idea of, there's the presence, there's somebody there for me, there's someone to connect to, there's some reason to go, the inventiveness, there's someone to help me, the facilitation, and then finally there's actually the content, whatever that happens to be. But it was about the people and how to make the people be part of it. What we've done at Solent is taken actually the iceberg model, which you can all look at, I'll post in a sec, which goes through 7 different sort of areas of integration, so integrated, collaborative, engaging, balanced, economical, reflective and gradual, and it's a model used by the Open University. But we looked at that for Solent and said, well, that still hasn't really got the people in it as much as we want, and we've adapted that. So pulling down those 5 different areas and really try and adapt into that. But part of it is also ensuring the cultural diversity, the structure, the inclusivity. We want to make sure everyone feels connected, not just are able to connect. So it's been quite interesting to adapt a model and include people in it, because I think, going back to Amber saying, let's all go look at the theory. A lot of the theory that sits, that we all refer to, either talks about online or it talks about the physical environment. But there's not a lot that talks about both in the same place and at the same time, and trying to really make the physical fit online in the same way. And I certainly couldn't find much, except for a few bits and bobs I found that Dave had written. So I don't know if I need to hand over to Dave White now to...
Okay, well, that takes the responsibility off me of picking who goes.
No.
Go on then, Dave. Do you want to start where some of these concepts came from?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose my experience, I suppose what came to mind soon after lockdown was lockdown in the UK is it actually stems from contact hours, actually, which is that I realised that a lot of our course teams were really, they were obviously emergency remote teaching, let's say. Everybody's immediate first thought, which is completely reasonable, is how do I replicate what I was doing face-to-face online? Which is a kind of reasonable first thought, but not necessarily a helpful one, the replication one, the practice mirroring. And I think I couldn't work out why people were suddenly doing really exhaustingly long Blackboard Collaborate sessions, which is what we have at UAL. And then I realized it was because they were mirroring contact hours. And that's what brought me around to the idea of presence, really, which was it struck me that what we crave when everything's fully online is a sense of connection, a sense of presence, and that being in incredibly long, I suppose the hope with online synchronous sessions was that they would have the same sense of presence as a similar length of time face to face, but they don't, because you're not embodied in the same way. And So that's what I ended up writing about and thinking about, and realizing that actually presence is quite a good like yardstick for designing online learning, or if you're thinking about engagement, because presence can come in so many different forms. And I realized that it was difficult to get across the idea that actually it's quite good to do asynchronous things, because I suppose asynchronous modes of online learning feel quite old-fashioned for some people. If people haven't taught online, fully online distance, or if they haven't engaged in online learning for a while, then yeah, things like forums and discussion posts and things like that, asynchronous like that, can feel quite old-fashioned. I mean, a lot of social media isn't exactly asynchronous. It's text-based, but it's quite quick, and the technology is such that we can have meetings like this. I mean, 10, 15 years ago, this would have been a super high-risk scenario, but now it's pretty straightforward. So all of that is to say that I started to find presence quite, as a number of people have, I think, independently, obviously. Presence is a really useful concept in terms of how we design things, because you ask yourself the question, what sense of presence am I creating with my students? Do they feel like I'm present? And you can do that through a variety of means. You can do that synchronously online, you can do it face-to-face, you can do it asynchronously if you do it well. So we put a lot of effort into encouraging courses to do timed discussion forums, or like open office hours, if you like, but in discussion forums, saying, well, we're going to start this discussion forum, I'll be actively moderating it between these hours, as a very sustainable way of creating that presence and that connection. So really that's what that was coming from. It was actually originally a kind of an attempt at a constructive way of stepping away from contact hours, because contact hours are almost entirely geared around the physical notion of the university. And then the more I thought about it, the more I realized almost everything we have to do with course design and course modeling is built around the physical conception of the university. And actually, I think we just need to move away from that from here on out, which again is why I think presence is a useful term, because I think we need to start looking for language that operates across the physical and digital. And presence works that way, but there are lots of things that don't. Contact hours. It just amused me that people really keen to hold on to contact hours during COVID-19, where you'd think the word contact would have been a bad thing. So yeah, that's where I got to. I'll stop there.
Well, no, because there was one other thing I wanted to, eventedness as well.
Oh, okay. Well, I feel like Dave Cormier can speak to eventedness better than me, because I know that he's been using that term actively in his institutional guidance or model. Is that right, Dave?
Okay, so Dave next then.
Mark's we're taking his job. Like, I mean, he's here, he's there, he's trying to organize things, and we keep telling him what to do. Sure, I'll take that from there. So, like many of us, we ended up desperately trying to come up with a model that was going to work in no time at all, that was going to, train a whole bunch of people who didn't want to be involved in this process how to do it. I'll go ahead and paste. This is the textbook that we built based out of that model, if you guys are looking for more detail. I'll try to avoid the keynote that Dave just gave us. So what we're looking to do with eventedness is talk to people about why you would do a synchronous activity. So when Dave talks about contact hours, I totally agree with him. That conception that teaching, my job is what happens when I go into a classroom and I teach. Right? And that classroom very much structures people's idea of when they should do it. So what they try to do is replicate the same thing. They try to do a 2-hour lecture, to which my immediate response is always, try watching your 2-hour lecture and see how you feel about it. Wherever you want to turn it off, that's where you should cut it and post. because that 2-hour lecture is difficult to watch online. But we try to encourage them to think of anything you do synchronously as an event. Think of it as something that if it's not exciting and it's not useful and it doesn't create energy, then don't do it synchronously, right? If it doesn't have that feeling of eventedness, if it doesn't have that idea of people coming together to create knowledge, or if it doesn't have that excitement, then you're probably something that you should do asynchronously. And that's the way we've been sort of leveraging it inside the institution, is having it as one of just those thoughts in the back of your head. Oh, I'm going to set up a time for us to all meet, which means that, you know, you have to get the dog settled, you have to make sure your kids are fed, you have to make sure that everything is sorted, and lock yourself in the bathroom if you're Mark Avid, and then make sure you can go ahead and do your work. So anytime you're putting anybody else through that pain and misery of being synchronously, it had better be an event. It had better be something that's going to be exciting and energizing. And that's what we've been sort of doing. The one thing I do want to say and add to Roger's post here, which I quite like, the one on LinkedIn, is when I look through all of these things, the first thing we do in our course here, and the first thing that we've been doing structurally with the ebook, you'll see it as the first chapter, is all of these things are about understanding the internet. And the thing that we've seen most consistently with faculty here, and I'd be interested to see if you guys have had the same experience with people you've talked to, is that the first piece that people need to understand is what the internet is and how it's different than being in a classroom. And all of these things, presence, connecting, the event, the way you facilitate the activities and all those things, imbued in all of these is a conceptual understanding of the internet as abundant versus the artificial cone of scarcity that we create in a face-to-face environment. Don't use your laptop, don't use your phone, don't have access to any of those things. We're going to give you one clear focus to work on, and that's what we're going to do. That face-to-face thing just can't happen on the internet. Creating a group is a pain in the ass in an asynchronous environment. Trying to do any kind of time-based assessment is almost impossible online. Multiple choice doesn't work if what you're looking for is content. All of those differences are about what the internet is. So we found that the first thing we have to do, if you break it into these 5 elements, it's a good enough model, and one that the first thing that has to happen to be successful online is understand what online is. And that's been the big struggle for us.
Okay, Sheila, do you want to come in on that as well?
Yeah, no, really interesting. I think going back to presence and what both Daves have said, I think what's always interesting when you're talking about developing online learning is that I should just say I've been working with quite a lot of institutions for the last couple of years, developing specifically resources for teachers about to do fully online training. And before that, when I was in an institution, that was part of my role to help people with designing their courses as well as teaching myself. But I think what it does, it makes you think about the act of teaching much more explicitly. And I think what a lot of people do, there's so many things that are implicit when you teach. Your presence in a physical campus is, it's kind of, you don't have to think about it because you're there. The students are there in the classroom, so you have to think about that. So I think it's a reimagining of space and place, which links to some of the things that Dave was saying there about, understanding the internet and digital literacies and what you're doing. But I think just now, as well as that sense of community and presence, we have to be thinking about our students and how we support them and how we're going to work together. So I think there has to be an awful lot more co-design with students as well to get everyone comfortable in this space and the place, whether that's synchronous or asynchronous, so that they understand what is actually going to happen there. And I think for the next 6 months anyway, that's going to be difficult. And I think in our rush to actually design the perfect course and to be present, to have your eventedness, to connect facilitation and content activities, that's quite a lot to do. So I think we could maybe just kind of slow down a bit. I really think that we need to just try and connect with each other and develop all of our presence, understand where we are, when we're going to be online, when we're not going to be online, what are the issues for our students? Because Roger made a really important point there. I think what's really coming through is kind of the connectedness problems we have with our physical infrastructure. When you have a whole lot of people in the house, as Dave's showing already, you can't always get connected. I might be breaking up just now because other people are using bandwidth in my house. So I think we need to think about that. But I think presence is always something you have to think about as a teacher. You need to be present, whatever, students need to know where you are. And, I think we've ignored that. It's going back to what Amber was saying about how many academics in her institution hadn't really used things. The VLE has been a dumping ground. It didn't have to be like that. It's very easy to have a presence in an institutional space, really easy. And it's just things like saying hello, doing a little, audio cast, a little podcast or a video, or just some of the language that you use. We are going to be doing this week. You're going to be doing this. I will see you here. There's lots of things you can do. So I think it's kind of exploring that kind of implicit and explicit and really having an honest conversation about place and space, and actually think it's okay. We might not get this right, but tell your students that, work with them, and let's try and be honest about this, because this is all new for everyone, because things are going to be changing quite a lot. So I think we need to just not be too panicked about getting everything perfect, because we're not going to get there.
Does anybody want to come back on that before we go to Amber? Does, yes. Go ahead. You're on mute.
Not. An observation about how people reach for something that's equivalent to the physical world is we've been having a question at Warwick about whether we have Microsoft Teams or Zoom. Now, we already have Microsoft Teams. The question is whether we also got a site license for Zoom. So the number of times that people have said to me that the reason why they need Zoom is so that they can see all the faces. And I found that quite interesting, because how realistic is it that that's actually the behaviour that you've got when you're teaching an online session, that you're actually scanning all the faces like that, when actually what you need to do is to transfer those models of student presence and participation into things like thumbs up and inserting polling and things that, as OU tutors, you're probably very adept at. But as people who are, for our academics that are quite new to teaching like this, they're reaching out for a technology that seems to replicate looking at rows and rows of faces. And I think it's quite interesting that there was, I saw some research about Zoom fatigue, and actually the fact that Zoom shows so many faces means that our social brain is trying to trying to process all of those faces in a way that's actually quite stressful. Yeah, I'm just exactly what someone's just put in the chat about, actually it's exhausting that you're trying to process all of those faces. But that didn't stop it being a very hot topic at my university but that's what I need. That's what I need in order to teach. So there's some areas where we have to be quite brave to get through people's first perception of what it is that they're going to be able to need to do in order to operate successfully in that space.
Balanson, wasn't it, at Stanford VR that did that research, which I mentioned because my line manager's in the audience.
Aha.
But did they say why they wanted that stuff? Why they felt they needed that Zoom, all those students to see them all across that thing? Is it just because that's what they were used to, or was there something surveillance-wise about that as well?
I think it's because that's what they're used to, and that feels like more similar to reading the cues as you would if you were physically in front of a group of students. So it's part of this, the rush to pivot and to gather the tools around us. That felt like an intuitive choice for a number of them, whereas Microsoft Teams didn't have as many screens and will probably never have as many screens, because I think there'll be a point when people realise that you can't really look at 12, 15, 20 faces at once and concentrate on what you're saying online.
And the point is really that you want that immediate feedback from people to show that they're understanding or not understanding, and you can do that with a few emojis just thrown up there, really, can't you?
Yeah, but both the staff and the students have to feel comfortable with that mode of communication, don't they, for that to feel okay. And
fluent in it as well, really. It has to be something that becomes second nature, which is why you need to practice them first. Okay, shall we take a few? Has somebody been scanning the questions? Mark, do you want to come in and tell us what people have been talking about and see if there's any questions come in that we could then respond to.
I would love to pick up on that Teams conversation for a sec while he's doing it. That's okay. No, that's okay. I even raised my hand. I don't think I've ever done that in my life. You guys were saying you could do that with a couple of emojis and a couple of hand raises, so I thought, I'll try raising my hand. Apparently that doesn't work, guys.
No, okay. I can see it now. I can see it. Look, there it is, that little hand. Okay. Oh, okay. Right? Fair enough. Go ahead.
So, the Teams v Zoom argument has been one that we've been down in the depths of over and over again. I had one conversation with an engineering prof, and he said, I need Zoom to be able to do my exams. And it was just that kind of surveillance thing. But he never thought of it that way. He's like, it's just like the way that Amber described it. He crystallized it as, this is what I do, and I need the thing that looks the closest to that. And then we walked through it, and I said, so do you recognize all 55 of the students who are going to be in your class? He goes, what do you mean? I'm like, well, if you're gonna watch them do an exam, like, how are you going to know who's doing what? And he's like, oh, well, I guess I could find their pictures. I'm like, I guess you could. Have you ever tried watching 55 people at the same time? And he goes, what? I'm like, just work your way through the process, man. How's it actually literally going to work? And when we got to, I mean, again, I'm talking to a smart person who is a, process engineer. And by the time we actually had that conversation, he goes, oh, this doesn't actually make any sense because we work in a digital environment. It doesn't actually work that way. I'm like, no, it doesn't. And then again, I do the same thing I always do, which is pitch Teams. Not because Teams is perfect. Not because it's a wonderful platform, though it has some functionality that's useful. You can set it up for breakout groups. You can set it up for a lot of things. But the thing that makes Teams different than Blackboard or D2L or whatever else is you actually need to be digitally literate to use Teams appropriately. You actually need to understand how a conversation works. You need to understand how to thread and unthread a conversation. You need to know how to create the subgroups and all of those things. And then Teams can be a really effective platform, but it requires that much more literacy. The thing that worries me about what we're doing right now is we're transitioning back to what is effectively a 1990s piece of technology, the VLE, and we're teaching everybody how to use it, which worries me a little because I feel like we have this grand opportunity to go, there's this thing like Teams, which is becoming actually business standard now for people. And while I am not somebody who thinks that universities should be preparing people for the workforce, I don't mind it as a side effect of the process. And nobody is going to get better at Blackboard and get a better job, whereas learning how to effectively manage a team inside of something like Teams could actually be useful for people in a way that, So I think there's a really good reason right now for talking about Teams. And I think the biggest piece, just to finish that thought, is that Teams persists, right? So if you have a team or you have a chat even, the conversation persists. Whereas with Zoom, you stand it up, you have a conversation, you turn it off, and all that stuff goes away. And to me, that makes it a really bad course platform, because then the idea is that you're either creating crystallized versions of content, but then, we're back to Plato. The content gets created and it can't defend itself anymore. And to me, something like Teams, which is, more like Slack, more at least 2010 than 1995, it's sort of a technology that more, like Dave was saying earlier, more represents the current way that technologies works rather than a discussion forum, which, while still effective, is really, 1995 tool.
I think Teams has a few misconceptions baked into it that makes it difficult. So, for instance, setting up this thing here, we tweeted to each other a couple of times last week, and then kind of set it all up 20 minutes before we started. That was easy enough with Connect. But with Teams, there's still some people that have been waiting all day to get into it because they're not members of the OU, so you have to invite them as guests, and it takes sometimes up to 4 hours for the server permissions to permeate through so they can get in there, and I think they are all now, but they've missed the online element, the asynchronous element, all the chat stuff, because I think there's a presumption that Teams only works within an organisation, it doesn't work between organisations, so all of them have their kind of advantages and disadvantages, I guess.
Mark, you are breaking up a lot.
Okay, so right then, I will do less talking then, and then hopefully get my microphone sorted for next time.
Add to that, Mark. I think I think David made you've made valid points there, but I think we do tend to get hung up on the technology, don't we? And it's this kind of Microsoft, Teams versus Zoom that's the big discussion just now. Whereas actually, I think if we want to be truly, digitally aware and providing the best educational experience for our students and our staff, we need to think about what is it we're actually doing, and then look at the technologies that we have available, because yes, most people have access to Teams, but not everybody does. And depending on your institution, there might be different limits on it. I know like Mark has said there, I've had issues trying to get into Teams in different places because of security. So if you're wanting to do something with external people to your staff team, if you want some experts, there can be challenges there. So I think we need to take it away from these kind of what technology are we using, because that's the simple level of conversation, and bring it back to like, well, what is it we actually need to get done this semester, and what is going to be the best way, or the best way for us to do it in our context. And our context could change, so there could be some things that actually, yes, Teams is great, and actually I think for some students just to say, right, go off, do your group work in Teams and come back, and or invite us to where things are and we'll come and assess it, or whatever, that's great. But I do think we need to be aware of just not getting into this kind of just oh, is it Zoom or is it Teams or is it the VLE, because everyone likes to bash the VLE, but they're there. So I think that's a good, we have to remember that they are there.
Amber?
So I agree with some of what you said, Sheila, but also one of the things we're finding is informed choice is useful. Uninformed choice leads people into mess. And then they get confused and they assume that we know some of the things that actually were in their own intricate design decisions, and it leads them into platforms that aren't supported. And it's sort of, on the crossing the chasm thing of going from the early adopters and innovators, the early majority to the late majority. I have wondered whether actually for the late majority, which we're only just getting into that phase at Warwick, believe it or not, when it comes to the BLE across the whole institution, that actually sometimes less choice might be what they need. But that for people who are more early adopters, early majority, choice is important. But I think that, sometimes too much choice leaves people thinking a lot about the tooling, ironically, rather than saying the other thing that you said, which is just start here. Just start here.
Yeah, Roger, do you want to come in on that? You're muted. Still on mute. Okay.
So I think there's another thing in there of just simple ease of use. Who cares what the technology is? Can I actually use it? So we can't have connectiveness if you can't connect, and there's enough barriers to connection. When I can get my 75-year-old father-in-law onto Zoom in 10 minutes, I'm going to use Zoom, because I couldn't help him fathom out WhatsApp or something else because it was too complicated for him. And then I'm agnostic to the platform. I just want to have a chat with somebody. So I think part of the popularity of Zoom is the 5 buttons, Fisher Price, it just works thing. And then you go on to other platforms and VLEs or Teams or whatever, and there's 1,000 buttons, and which one do you press for what, and then you go back to this choice thing again. So I think some technologies are inherently simplistic, therefore relieving the user of the choice of 1,000 buttons they may or may not have to press to do something. And the technology that could be more complex or could afford better experiences actually affords no experience, because if you can't use it in the first place, you don't even get in that first hurdle. You don't get in the door, as it were, into the learning. So I think we've, years ago we probably all experienced the wonders of Second Life. How wonderful that could have been now if it was a better product. The biggest issue for everybody was the technology hurdle of getting into the space and using it, and the high spec kit you needed and everything else to get there. The people that managed to jump that hurdle had some great experiences and done some wonderful things, but for most people the technology was such a massive barrier to learning that no learning happened. So I think that's another thing we need to consider here, that I get it all day long, that we should be doing these wonderful things with Teams. Click on this button. Which button? Out of the 1,000. There's 2 chat buttons. There's 2 epaulets. There's 2 this. There's 2 that. But actually, you know, when we've got no physical support help desk, which is one of the things that's in my team, for students to wander up with their laptop and phone and go, just show me how it works, please. Which button do I press to get in this thing? Trying to do that online, which my help desk team have been doing over the summer and over the spring, it has been quite time-consuming and painful occasionally. Remote sessions that go on for 2 hours to help students get into their exam. It's all of those things we've got to build out of this. We've got to get the students to the learning, wherever that is, or to their tutors or to their peers. And as you say, Amber, you know, stop having, and Sheila, stop having this argument about which technology does it. Does it really matter if we're in a good lecture room or an old lecture room or the nice bit of campus or the old bit of campus out the back? They've actually got to campus, you know. That's the starting point for a lot of students. So electronically, it's going to be the same. Digitally, it's going to be the same. If we turn people off too quickly, we're going to lose them.
Dave C.
Which is part of the ISO model for retention paper.
Yeah, the gradual bit in there bit by bit. Dave C. was next.
Sorry.
Are you talking to me?
Sure.
Mark?
I think the one thing.
Oh no, that one. Yeah.
Learning to keep an eye on.
The one thing that I think we'd all agree on is that the cognitive load is super high for everybody right now. Everybody is strained. Everybody is stressed. People are in their houses in ways they've never been before. People have been forced to meet their family in ways that they not necessarily planned on. I spent a lot more time with my kids, which has been great, but it's a lot. And the emotional energy of trying to teach faculty right now is much higher than it's ever been for me in terms of the emotional needs on me as a facilitator. So that strain is all the way there. And I think bringing us back to the title of the talk and what Roger has here, I think while that conversation about what learning is for is the one that I always want to be in, Sheila, right now, I think I side with Amber's perspective on this, and I'm going to take Amber out of context in an attempt to try to make it not my fault to say this. But these kinds of, here are the 5 things you should be worried about, is what the vast majority of people need right now. And the use this tool and don't think about it, I also think is what the vast majority of people need right now. Because they have so many other conceptual pieces of work they need to do that our responsibility to me as the people inside of our institutions, people with roles like Dave's, people with roles like Amber, consultants like Sheila, the role that what we need to do now is reduce that cognitive load in any way we can. Get people in the door, because there's so many of them to get through the door. Like, we did 6 weeks of intensive training. We got 150 faculty through. But there's still 350 left, and we did all the ones who volunteered. You know, there's still 350 of them out there. And I certainly don't have the time to sit down and have a conversation with each one of them about what it means for them to know and to just have some shared epistemic framework, which I do think is important. The time just doesn't exist. So to me, the fewer options, and I understand I should go to context too, Sheila. I apologize, but it helps my point when I reframe what you say in a more simplistic manner. Then it's easier for me to make my point, don't you? Like, sorry, I am sorry to have misrepresented you in that way. But I think that the presence piece, like telling people that they need to be present, is an absolute must right now. People need to understand that piece. They need to understand how they can facilitate connectedness to try to give people the experience of university, and to me that's where that piece fits in. That eventedness, that ability to be excited through the pieces, the facilitation, like how we actually make that happen, and then coming down to content. I know it's assessments not in here, other than that little formative feedback piece. And assessments where everything comes down to in this country, where we have the biggest fights, but how we rethink our activities so that they work in an online context. And I think giving people this 5-step piece, while I might add an element or take one away, these are totally critical right now. See what I did there? I brought us back to the conversation. That was me.
Yeah, nice. Dave White.
Yeah, I was just going to say, well, a couple of things. One is, you know, there's a constant debate backwards and forwards about whether technology should be simple or powerful. And what I find at my institution is it depends who you're talking to. You know, I think we have you know, staff capabilities and confidence are very spiky, and so you know, we have to provide an environment that allows people that are confident to do what they want to do and allows people that are less confident to not get overrun. So there's that. I don't think there's a correct way of doing this in that sense. The other thing is just coming back to teaching and learning. I wonder whether to a certain extent this crisis has just helped us discover that pedagogy in a large part is face-to-face sessions where I talk to you about what you then need to do for homework, and then we'll have another look at it next time. And that's what pedagogy is. And that within kind of online learning, I suppose another way of looking at that is those of us that have been involved in sort of online learning, whether that's fully online or blended learning, have been thinking about teaching and learning for years in very particular ways, but that actually the predominant practice around pedagogy is very geared to the lecture and the seminar. And so that's not necessarily a critique of those modes, but I think perhaps maybe as a sector we've just been discovering that there isn't that much pedagogy out there. And that's why there was such a drive to replicate face-to-face, like that conversation about why do I need to see 50 faces in Zoom is definitely something to do with, well, the online environment is there as a backup for when the face-to-face environment fails, and therefore it has to be the same. And of course that just causes disappointment, it's guaranteed. And of course that's the reason why you see never-ending stories about online not being as good as face-to-face, because it's not, because it's different, because where it is good can't be compared with face-to-face in quite the same way. So I think we've been, in short, I think we've perhaps been discovering that when we say, hey guys, here's how you do really good online learning and teaching, actually what we've been saying is, here's how you do learning and teaching. It's just we've never had the opportunity to have that conversation before, and it's only this massive shift in context that has brought us to that point. So I think that's one of the reasons why people feel overwhelmed. It's got nothing to do with online learning. I think it's just got to do with learning.
Yeah. And actually, there's something about face-to-face learning that you kind of can get away with poor pedagogy more often than you can with online learning. And that's what the move to online, the emergency online move. No,
I think what I'm saying, Mark, is just very quickly, to pick up very quickly, and then I'll stop talking, is I don't think it's, I'm not sure that anybody thinks it's poor pedagogy. I think we might.
Yeah. Yes, but that's because they're wrong and we're no more than they do. Isn't it?
Well, if you want to go that way, I'll enjoy reading that blog post.
Okay. Amber, sorry. Yeah, go on, Amber.
So I've noticed, I think, commentary from Martin Weller and others has pointed out that in a lot of the journalism and a lot of the articles about what's going on with this online pivot, they're not really acknowledging things like the Open University and what it is that already goes on there. There is a really weird blind spot amongst these educational journalists that they forget to mention the OU. And I've always been quite interested about people who are on teaching contracts with the OU, but also with other universities. I would like to think that some of that expertise of taking online learning seriously at the heart of what you do can reach other universities, through discussions that happen in departments and things. But I've wondered sometimes in department discussions that I've had whether actually some of the staff who are on those part-time contracts find themselves on the edges of those discussions in a department. They're not taken as seriously as the staff who are full-time, which means that the voices aren't getting amplified. I would love to see more expertise from the OU being listened to. I don't think it's the OU's not saying it. I think it's that universities like mine aren't hearing it.
I think there's also the last conference this is what my session was on, is asking somebody why those messages aren't getting across. and listening, discussing some of those reasons for why they might not be. And one of them is a divide between the educational expertise of the ed tech people and the academics who are doing the teaching. And those discussions aren't happening between them because there's a difference in perception of expertise there. It's like this isn't a discipline in itself, the ed tech stuff. So therefore, I don't need to listen to it. And I think that's maybe where some of this failure is happening.
Yeah,
Sheila, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I just want to say, just to add to that, I think there's a wider political context there about, they go back to some of what Dave was saying about what education is for and what politicians and funders think that education in universities are for. And they do associate it with campuses and big shiny buildings and the lecture. So I think there's a wider thing going on there, and I think again there is an irony about that kind of education 4.0 nonsense. Well, I maybe didn't say that, but there's kind of like on the one hand they're saying you have to have these kind of digital literacy skills and la la la, but when we actually are in a context now when everything has to go online, it's suddenly, oh my God, nobody's going to get a decent education because they're not sitting in front of a lecture and listening to what someone's saying. And there's a real contradiction there within our society that is much, much bigger than we can ever go into here. But there are reasons for that, and there are reasons why. I think that's why I would always question why we have, we need to be careful about having the Zoom and the Microsoft thing, because there are bigger forces that do want to change education, and not necessarily in the way that we want to change it. So I do think we have to be very, very careful and think we can't forget the wider political context. But anyway, that's a rant for a whole other day.
Yeah, I think. Oh, Roger. Yeah. Go ahead, Roger.
I just wanted to pick up on the point of the Open University message getting out that Amber raised there was for us taking an adapted iceberg model and saying this comes from the Open University and they're experts, and we've added some other experts to it and come up with our own model of, well, principles actually we've called them, has been very, very helpful, because you're going into course teams and using the Open University's clout to give yourself some validity in what you're trying to say, rather than saying this is something we've come up with that our university is going to do because our Vice Chancellor demanded it. And it's a different conversation when you turn up with those bits of paper in your hand and say, look, this is what they do, and they've been doing it for a long time. But I just want to go back sort of a bit about inventiveness again. I was going to come in earlier about. And also the mention of the timetable and how we're almost welded to that, and been daily discussions that are going on for hours about how we untangle this. But I think the timetable was the inventiveness of the physical campus, because there's something to do. Look, it's 2 o'clock on a Tuesday, I'm off to do Maths 101 or whatever it is. There's somewhere to go and something to do. And some of those other things that fall into place around that event of the timetable is the connection. There's other people there. You go and get your support and so on. Moving that into a digital and online format, we've very much encouraged our VLE layout to not be week 1, week 2, week 3, which seems to be the standard, because week 1, here's your lecture notes, here's your activity you need to do, and actually get people to rethink into topics. And partly there's a practical element there. If we have to have half a class or half a module come on campus to do something in a workshop or studio while the other half do something else, teaching by topic makes that a little bit easier. So there's some practical terms there, but also just trying to move away from being welded to the timetable and this weekly delivery and this weekly something's going to happen, into, in this module, we're going to learn 3 or 4 or 5 topics and how we're going to use it, and give the student a journey through the topics rather than a journey through time. But actually in practice, what we found is people are taking out week 1, week 2 and relabeling it topic 1, topic 2, topic 3, because there's still this very much chronological, linear delivery model that people are welded to, that the timetable has welded them to. And going back to connectiveness again, it's how we get out of the silos, that we've got all of our silos, our classrooms, 30 or 60 people or whatever, sat in them for an hour on the timetable. And the VLE's been, a replicator of that, where we've taken student records data and put everyone in a module group, and, they're in their little silos again. So that is certainly a challenge we haven't quite got to the end of yet, and there's some other business reasons the timetable works, like how are the associate lecturers going to get paid, because that's all run off timetable data, and that goes back to contact hours. It's it's a many-pronged challenge that we haven't got to, but returning to the learning side, really trying to get people to think about the topics they're teaching and how the students are learning them, and try not to do it chronologically has been one of the biggest challenges, I think, about the change we're trying to affect at Solent. Silence. Mark, we can't hear you.
My microphone is on. Oh, okay.
I can hear you now.
Just, I'll suddenly a loose connection with this headset somewhere. I'll hold it push it together. Can you all hear me? No. God, this is insane. No. Okay, how about that?
When you shouted, it was.
How about this?
Try holding the mic closer, Mark.
Okay. Well, I can't get it any closer. Okay. So we should go to questions from the chat. Is that going to be? Are there any sort of things that have come out from the chat, Mark, that you want to feed back to everyone? Or anything that's cropped up so far from the discussion that's been going on in the chat? Oh, we get multiple attendees. Okay, because I mean, I can go to some stuff that I've been noting down. Okay, hopefully you can hear me. But okay, so I'm just trying to think where we could go straight away. Yeah, maybe unpacking more about what you feel has been revealed by this, some of the most recent stuff, the emergence of remote teaching, where these bad takes have come from, about the move to online learning. Why do you think there's been such a big lapse in understanding or big kickback from people that seem to be so against the whole idea of remote teaching? For instance, Dave C said there's quite a few of his lecturers aren't engaging. I think 150 were out of 350. What is the barrier that people are experiencing with this move to online? Okay, Dave C is.
You've seen that, Mark. Okay, good.
I think to speak further to that, what we found at our institution, at least, and in talking to other people, we've done a bunch of group background shares with other groups at other institutions, and the response has been pretty consistent. What you've got is people who have been experts at what they do for a very long time. And I'm super sensitive to the feelings that we get the first day of the course I taught it 6 weeks in a row, so 6 one-week intensive courses. The first day, there's a shock value. You know, you've got people who have been university, well, we would call them professors here, not necessarily in the same sense that you mean it there, but people who have been tenured professors for 20 years who are suddenly not the expert and are suddenly not comfortable doing their job that they have gotten comfortable doing. And that sense of comfort is really important to people's understanding of themselves as an expert, as a professional. And I think that for me, the work that we've done, the pedagogies of care work we've done the first day of that course has been really revealing about just how hard it is for people to make this transition. And I think that's one of that has to be top of mind all the time. Like, this is, for a lot of people, the hardest thing that they've done in the last 20 years. Certainly professionally it is. Mm. And I understand the resistance. And I understand why people who have never had a positive online learning experience, most, come in and go, who took, I feel like I have to apologize every time I use this word, who took a MOOC from some institution somewhere and went in and watched a bunch of videos and then clicked a bunch of buttons. And I think Sheila or Amber mentioned this earlier, like, where that's the thing, the executive thing, that's what Amber said earlier. They've taken that slick executive style thing where they watched a bunch of videos, clicked a bunch of buttons, and got a certificate at the end, and are thinking, well, that sucks. I don't want that to be what my course is. And I mean, the people that I've met, the faculty I've worked with, they were awesome. But they teach stuff like dance, which is a struggle to transition to the internet. Or they teach in labs, or and so understanding that it's still possible and breaking it down for like a chemist, when you sit down and you start talking to them, you're like, look, how much of the time in a real chemist's life right now are they actually touching chemicals? What do you mean? Like, well, what a chemist's job now? What is it mostly? It's mostly using a computer. You're not actually going that far away from what being a professional chemist is by using the internet. You can actually replicate it really well. You can't do what you did when you were in college, but you yourself, you know that your industry has changed. Like, you understand that. You need to kind of make that transition here and see this as an opportunity. That transition, there's a lot of emotional labor there. I think that's the biggest thing. I just spent 10 minutes explaining that, but it's a lot of emotional labor.
Yeah.
There. That's a shortened version of it.
But it's I think also. Okay,
sorry.
I think also, Dave, it's a so there was a weird thing that happened at the start of the crisis, which is that it didn't go terribly badly, and I think some of what's happening is that this has forced everyone to acknowledge that they were already really digital, even if they thought that they weren't. So I think there's that aspect to it too. And also on top of that, and I think we're all feeling this, to use the sort of artsy end of the words, is a loss of agency as well. So I think one of the things that I'm finding is that I try to separate out, well, look, there's a crisis, which is why we're all online, and then there are things you can do with online learning. So occasionally, I mean, this is not quite the case, but there's something weird going on where sometimes I feel like I have to remind people that I'm not the reason why everything's online learning. Do you know what I mean? And like, certainly at an art and design place, everybody's missing the materiality. Nobody wants to be doing just online, but that doesn't mean that online is terrible. So, there's some things to unpick there. And then you can have a conversation about, well, what can we do under these circumstances? But I think starting every conversation is by going, look, we don't think this is ideal. I prefer to come to the office occasionally. I'm going nuts, is actually can be quite a useful starting point. So, Amber.
Amber,
yeah.
Amber, do you want to just...
Yeah, no, that just made me think of that just made me think of a conversation that I'd had with someone that's quite steeped in pedagogy, pedagogical theory and everything like that, who has said to me on a number of occasions, well, the thing is, you see, what e-learning people don't think about is embodiment. And I'm saying there's a whole rich literature of e-learning people thinking about embodiment and virtual field trips and the physical, and actually it's your lack of knowledge. It's not that e-learning people don't think about that stuff.
And where's that? I mean, obviously, I don't expect them to be like PhD, but where does that presumption that we're not listening, we don't study that come from? Where is that complete blind spot about the field of work? Oh, Sheila.
I think there's something there about kind of the academy, if you like, and in some ways we've allowed kind of online and blended learning to be seen sort of a second class in some ways. And there's no need, there has never really been a need for people who wanted to engage with it have engaged with it. And I think you probably find in most institutions that people who really care about teaching have been doing everything. They've been using technology, they've been using blended learning, they're using more active approaches anyway. They're the people that go out and try things, and they accept that things might go wrong, but they're up for that. And they know who to get support as well. But I think there's a gap in leadership. I don't think we have enough people at senior enough positions to be pushing this in all universities. There are in some. So I think there's just been a lag. And also there's this wider perception in society that education, in particular university education, is about sitting in a lecture, because if you're a good professor or a teacher, you're a good lecturer, and that's not true. You know, that's not true. And I think there's a myth or a mythology around about this, and if we as a sector, if we can't break that mythology now, then we're never going to be able to do it. So I think it's incumbent on us all to try and be sharing as much as we can and be talking to people in wider society, having the conversation we're having now with more people, with educational journalists, and you know, doing that. But again, that's quite a big thing to do. But I think it's just something that's happened, and I think we've all been complicit in that. Even those of us who, I know everyone in this panel, we've all tried for years to support things, but you know, there's only so much that you can actually do as well. But collectively, and now we've got a context where we can maybe do a bit more. But the big issues there.
Brilliant. That's, I think, a perfect place on which to end. Thank you, everyone. Look forward to when we can actually. I mean, okay, this is great, but I still miss being able to meet at face to face as well. So looking forward to when that can happen next as well. So thanks, Dave C, Dave W, Amber, Sheila, Roger for kicking the whole thing off. So okay, so that's it, and thanks everyone for all your attention during the last hour. Thank you. Okay, bye. Back to Mark.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Right, that's my audio. So do join us tomorrow. Thank you again, panel. Do join us tomorrow. We're starting, got a welcome from Anne Jones at 9:45. We have a keynote from Charles Crook on the video lecture after today's panel discussion. So Charles Crook from Nottingham will be talking about the video lecture from 10 to 11. And then we have a series of sessions after that, including some really interesting up-and-coming work in the doctoral consortium. So I hope to see you tomorrow. Do drop into the Teams space later on today or tomorrow morning. Otherwise, 9:45 tomorrow morning for Anne Jones, who will introduce Charles Crook's keynote on video lecture. Thank you all so much for all your presentations and participation today. Thank you.